All right. So, like I said, After Effects comes bundled with Cinema4D, which is a 3D app. So it's like Blender, Maya, some of the others. But it's a very, very good 3D app. I've used Cinema4D for years. And the version that After Effects comes bundled with is the light version, which basically means that it's kind of a stripped down version of After Effects. But you can still do some kind of neat effects. So I think that the first time you use it, that you try to use it, you're probably going to have to register it. But it's an easy process to do, and then you've actually got access to it. So once you open After Effects, you can start it all in After Effects, and then you'll move in and actually work in Cinema, and I'll show you the basics of how to get around. There's kind of a lot to it, but there are a lot of tutorials on it, all that kind of thing, and I can do even more if you're interested in it, but I'll at least do enough to kind of give you an idea of what you can do, and then we'll go from there. So from within After Effects, you create a comp like you normally do, and then down here in our animation timeline, just select New, and at the very bottom should be Maxon Cinema4D file. And the first thing you'll need to do, oh, that's right, I started working on that. All right, so the first thing we'll need to do is save the Cinema file. And a Cinema4D file has a C4D extension for it. So just save it somewhere, and the program will launch in a moment. There it is. So the program launches, and the actual transition from one to the other is made through a plugin called Cineware, which you probably saw pop up there on the side of After Effects. But you kind of control it from there. So in the program itself, the full-blown version, you get the ability to work with polygon models and sort of sculpt and whatnot. The light version doesn't give you that feature. And the full version gives you some really cool renderer options. Basically, throughout the 3D process, you've got, after everything's kind of designed, you've got people that build the models, you have modelers, people that texture it, so you build these grayscale models, which we'll see in a moment. And you got to apply textures to them, images, different types of materials, you build those out. And then once you've got it all set up through a camera, you position your scene, you arrange it, and then you render it. And the render is, that's what we see, and that's what shows up in movies and commercials and, everywhere in between. So it's those primary categories. Within the 3D industry, there are plenty of generalists, but generally speaking, there are people that just excel at building models, people that excel at texturing them, and then people that just excel to the nth degree of rendering them. So, but I mean, I've done 3D for years, and I do it all, so you can certainly do that too. But within the 3D space, there's just a lot of different pieces parts that kind of go with it. So the rendering aspect, Cinema4D has a really nice renderer that it uses that gives some really high-end renders. With the light version, you don't get that renderer, you do the rendering through After Effects. So, but you get the ability to separate out channels and some other things like that, which I'll show you. So it's basically working in a 3D space is what we're going to do. And just know that we can do some pretty cool things here, but the full-blown version has a ton more options and a ton more things you can actually do with it.
my tendency usually I've got a full version. I don't have my full version right now. I haven't used it in a couple of months, and it was a monthly kind of like almost $200 a month, and I let it kind of lapse since I wasn't using it. But usually I would model stuff in Cinema, and I'd use After Effects just for placement, so that I knew where I needed to combine in my type and other objects. So, but this way works just about as well, but a little bit differently. So, so anyway, that's kind of what we're going to look at. So, you know, I added this Cinema4D model, and through my composition, I'm still in After Effects here. That's the workspace. But I need to go over to Cinema4D to actually do the work. And this is what the interface looks like. So we've got our basic, along the side here, we've got our basic pen tools, scale, rotate, move, a couple of different selection tool options in order to select objects, and sort of a general little tool. We work in all three dimensions: X space, Y space, and Z space. We're building models. So I can actually lock each of my different dimensions up here, or planes. And then coming on across here, I've got different view modes that I can look at things, which I'll show you here in a moment. These are rendering icons. We can do a render out of Cinema, but we can't really save it out of the late version. So we got all that, and then we've got all of our items down through here. Splines that we can work with, circles, squares, that kind of stuff. Geometric solids. Type. These are some different modifiers, so I'll show you a few of those. They're referred to as effectors, but basically they're tools to allow us to shear, bend, twist, manipulate the shapes that we put down. And then these are not really effectors. They're construction objects. Effectors are down here, which this only comes with 2 effectors. We won't even really look at those. And then I can put a sky, background, floor, a stage, that kind of stuff into my scene, and that kind of stuff running down through here. So, and then the other menus here will do are basically our properties menus, kind of like we have in After Effects and we have in Illustrator. So we can look at all that, and our animation timeline is at the bottom. So I'm going to start this out by just placing a cube in the middle of the space. And if usually with the 3-button mouse I'll do this, but the 1, 2, and the 3 key will allow me to, the 1 key, I can pan the object around my scene, or pan my scene. I can zoom or dolly in and out, and then the 3 key allows me to orbit around and kind of set a position. This is my workspace. If I render this right now, if I save this and I go back into After Effects, there's my 3D scene. So it updates into After Effects pretty real time. So it's the geometric shape. One of the icons up along here, so here along the top, these are our pan, dolly, and orbit controls. If I don't use the 1, 2, and 3 key, I can use these keys right here, click on them and move them around. But right next to that is a window
item, toggles the view. So if I click on that, it'll show me all three views. So I can see them top, left, right, front, back, as well as my active camera view. And I can kind of work back and forth between these. I'm looking at this, and there's different shading views as well within each of these workspaces. So this is using, if I go up here with the little menu items for this viewport, display, this is set to Garand shading, which is sort of a shaded view. I can look at all of these others in the same different display modes. I could set it to Garand or quick shading. On a cube, you don't see much difference in some of these, but so I can see what I'm actually doing, you know. I can work in either a wireframe view like this, or I can switch it over to a solid or a shaded view. So I can work between these three different views if I want, or I can work in just one of them. This being my front view. It tells me in the upper right-hand corner. So I can quick shading, click on my multiple views again, and I'll just go back into my default camera view and kind of move things around a little bit. So those are kind of my views right off the bat. This particular cube, if I want to modify it, these little, I can move it around with the widgets, which are just like, you know, the 3D space in Cinema has. But I can also sort of adjust my scale and my dimensions of the cube by moving the little dots. When I've got an object selected, over here along the side, the bottom menu is basically a properties menu. It's referred to as attributes, but I can make those same adjustments that I was making here by moving those little knobs around by sliding the X, Y, and Z dimensions on the shapes. To sort of resize those. But I've got this object view. I can even round over the corners of the cube. Oops, not separate, so fill it. And I can sort of round over the edges. In different forms, all of the different parametric objects have similar kinds of controls. So if I go in here and add another, maybe I add there's a sphere, cylinders, a capsule, there's where'd it go? A landscape, which if I size this out, becomes sort of uneven terrain, if you will. Slide it down, set my cube right in the middle of it, like a giant bunker. But when I add objects to my scene, they all show up here along the side. And, you know, I can actually turn them on and off by clicking the check mark. There's also these little stoplights here. One's for viewport and one's for render. So by default, they're both on and everything, I can see everything and I can render everything. If I, like on the cube, if I change this little If I make them both green, that's the same as default. But if I turn one, click on it and turn one red, the top one is my viewport view, the bottom one is my render. So basically whenever I render this, the cube won't render. It'll disappear. Put them back the way they were. So, but we can build, you know, there's a lot we can build out of by just combining different different shapes. So, and you know, most of the time I think maybe it's easier just to stick with type and that kind of thing, but you know, we can build refrigerators, chess pieces, I mean, pretty much anything. You just got to break it down into its basic geometric forms is all and kind of put them together. So if I was going to build if I get rid of the two of these and was going to build, say, grab a cylinder, and I could grab another cylinder, make it smaller, maybe. Slide it up here. And then just start sort of stacking stuff together, as it were. These deformers down here, bend, shear, twist, taper. If I put, let's see, this cylinder here is the tall one. So if I put taper inside of the cylinder, sort of fit it, then I can taper that cylinder and give it a little bit different volume. Go back over here, grab my sphere, pull it up. Create a quick down and dirty chess piece. I mean, the more details I put, and with 3D models, it's like anything else. The more detail you put into something, the better it looks, the more real, more believable it looks, right? So, you know, I'm just kind of roughly, quickly kind of putting shapes together, but I could, with the cylinder here, if I go down and take a look at the options I've got for it, I can, if I go under caps, which are the ends, I could fillet those, kind of round those around. And if we look at this really closely, it's got flat edges on it, which doesn't look particularly great. But if I go into my attributes here, I can change the number of rotation segments. So it's only got 16 rotation segments right now. If I increase that to say 60, that gets a lot smoother, right? A lot nicer looking. Same thing goes with this one. So I can kind of increase that resolution. I'll grab a torus. Scale this whole thing down. But we're just, you know, kind of building it out to get something that looks good as we go. So there's a pawn so far. I could add, let's save that. And if we go back to After Effects, give it a minute. There we go. So there's my pawn. And I'm just going to kind of keep working at this a little bit. So I've got this shape. I can, like I said, I can add a floor. So if I go down here along all of my different objects, select a floor object, slide it down just a little bit. So there's my floor, pull it to the bottom. And then, you know, all these different objects that are making up my shape, my object here, maybe I name this one pawn. And I can take all of these other objects and just drop it right underneath it. This is the same as parenting in After Effects. So now when I move the base, everything else will go with it. I've got one object. I've got a floor, I got my pawn. Zoom back. I could, you know, duplicate this, just copy it, and paste it. I could even, with this pawn, there's an array object that I could drop it into. Make a ring of pawns, or actually this isn't a grid, yeah. So it'll just do a ring of pawns. It's an array. It puts them together in a circular kind of a pattern. So we're kind of starting to create something that looks like something. Set that up. Then, so I can build all sorts of shapes that I want to build, different objects. But they also need, I mentioned that there's, so modelers that build stuff like this. And this is a very kind of a primitive, simple form of modeling. It's just, like I say, it's taking an object, breaking it down into its core elements and kind of building it all out together. But like I said, the full version offers the ability to do something called NURBS modeling, as well as polygon modeling, which is more like sculpting by and large. So you can get some much more organic kinds of shapes, but it works pretty decent. So we've got a model made. They need textures. So if this little icon up here at the top corner, if I click on this, it opens up a texture window. And if I click on the plus sign here, I can create materials. So I'm just going to do a default material, make it red, and then I'll just drag it onto my pawn. And I'm kind of keeping things relatively simple here, but you can, you know, this, within the materials properties for this, I can add an image or texture. So if I had a marble texture, I could apply that here. I don't think I do, but let's see.
marble. There we go. Let's download that. So I could load that image in. Yes. And if I render that now, it's got that texture applied to it, although it needs some work. Normally you would spend a little more time with the texture to make sure that it seamlessly kind of wraps, but I'm trying not to make a 4-hour thing out of this, so. But I could probably change the wrapping mode. Let's try cylindrical. No. Cubic works out okay for all intents and purposes. It's like anything, it's about the amount of time and care you take with things as to how they come out. But so just kind of building objects. Let's do this. And then let's add another material for the floor. I'll just use a regular white material, drop it on there. And I'm going to close that up for the time being. I've also got different light sources that I can use. So if I go back here to my 4 views, I can add spotlights, target lights, area lights, different types of lights, just a standard, a regular generic kind of a light. But let's see. Grab an area light, place it. So now I start getting some shadow. And let's see, let's turn this back around so I can see what's going on. Slide my light source up. My light source has all sorts of different options. The intensity, for one, raise it or lower it. Shadow, which I do want. By default, it doesn't have any, but we'll add area shadows. The types of shadows you choose and the lights you choose have an effect on your render times as well. So, but we'll do that. And if I take a quick test render of that space, then you see we're starting to get shadows coming off of stuff. So starting to take on a little bit of life. Dark background looks kind of, I don't know, dark. I can add a background to it. And if I'm going to do that, I need to add a rendering tag to it so that the background composites into the floor. So now when I render it, now I don't get that black area in the background. Open up my materials, put that on my background. So there we go. Save it. and I've got full control over these materials as well. I can make them reflective, high gloss. I mean, if I want to kind of really get into this, I can change the highlight strength. See, it's starting to pick up some highlights in there. See, pump strength, your strength, fall off, makes it sharper. So that starts giving them a little bit more volume, a little more life. And so on and so forth. But, you know, if I want to make them, actually, let's put a sphere in the middle. Yeah, I'll kind of do that. Let's create a material for that. That's highly reflective. So now when it renders, you know, all sorts of different kinds of finishes that we can put on these things. So the material, if I change the roughness, turns more aluminum-like. Still reflective, but it changes the look of the material. So, you know, all sorts of different things you can do with materials to sort of bring up that quality. Save that. And I'm going to turn off real quick. Let's hide the array in this object. And try some type. So if I add a type object, dance, pick a typeface. When I create type, it simply gives me sort of a wire, like a wire outline of it. So I've got to give it some volume in some way or some form. So beneath my type object, here inside of these other constructors, I can do an extrude. Toss my type into that, it gives it some life. I could drop my material onto it. On this extruded object, let's see, let's look at the caps. And kind of ease those over a little bit. See what we get. Try that bend deformer, drop it in there, fit it. If I move that bend deformer, whoa, I can kind of animate that a little bit. So with deformers, you got to be kind of careful. If you go too far, you get bad geometry. But so if we wanted to make that guy animate, I could go down here to my timeline, and it's a keyframing process just like After Effects has, except that when you move your playhead to a different part of the timeline, you've got it, and it automatically drops a keyframe. You've actually got to apply keyframes in Cinema. So here's the very beginning, and I'm just going to animate the bend deformer. So the strength and the strength is actually what's going to animate. So go back to 0, and I add a keyframe just by clicking on the little dot right next to it. So I want that to be, and I'm going to go to the very end and set that again. And then we'll go this way. Actually, let's do this. And the angle. Let's come to right about here. Go there. Reset both those keyframes. Do that. Play that along. One of the nice things about animation in cinema is it automatically eases for you. Notice that it's got kind of a nice easing going on. So just rotate that a little bit, drop it down, because when he dances, he kind of goes too far. Let's save that. And if I come back over to After Effects, here he is again. In a moment. There we go. And we can see the animation still, still plays through. So, and I should be able to render this out, and it'll actually have all of the floor and the background in it. It should, unless the background doesn't pick up. I forget whether the background picks up or not. But regardless, so there's a 3-second animation. I can still add. I'm actually going to lock that. I can still add type or anything else I want to my scene. And then I just kind of render it like most things. If I go to composition, add to the render queue, and render it. let's see what we get. I think that's on my work. Record you. So I can animate it out that way, although it did not pick up my background. I probably need to have an actual object in it. I forget. Yeah. So if I go back to my cinema file, rather than, what I could do is just drop it inside of a, that's the best thing to do. The floor didn't work there. So let's take out the floor in the background. I'll toss it in a cube. That should work. So I can render that out of After Effects as well. But the there we go. So now I'll get the whole room kind of behind it. So, you know, that's kind of a simple, example of what we can do. You know, there's all sorts of cool things. But this method is actually, go back to, but this is all cinema, built out that way. The hand or the arm. All the 3D elements are all done out of cinema the same way. So the textures are higher, like, you know, the textures here are a higher quality than what I was putting in before. Same here. But that's Cinema4D through the After Effects, you know, rendered through the After Effects window. So you can get some really kind of, this was as well, the tool chests. These guys. But it just takes time, you know, to really kind of build stuff out and get the materials right. I mean, it takes a lot of test renders and that kind of thing just to get the materials so they reflect and behave correctly. The Cineware plugin allows you to even, if I have a camera that's in my Cinema4D file, I can also select that camera to render through After Effects. So it's using a Cinema4D default camera right now. But if I go back into my cinema file, add, did this to me earlier. It locked up after I left it, so I need to restart it. But You know, you can, I mean, but you get a lot of control out of that too. Usually whenever, when 3D studios render out in their pipeline, it's a little bit different than just rendering an animation like I just did there. They'll usually render like the RGB pass as one. They'll render the shadow passes as another, reflection passes as another, and then they'll composite those all together in After Effects, layer them and then adjust them to get them to their liking or to the style that they're trying to affect. This add-on will allow you to do that. If I want to, there's a multi-pass workflow. If I turn that on, let's see. There's a multi-pass workflow that should allow me to actually render out shadow plates and that kind of thing. So, but it's, you know, the 3D tools in After Effects itself do an okay job in a 2.5D sort of way. But if you really want to do real 3D in any way, shape, or form, you use something like Cinema that pipelines in. But it's, you know, it's fun to work with, that's for sure. So, but it just takes a little bit of getting used to. So, let me first quit Cinema. Open a new Cinema file. No. This is one I did earlier. Same kind of thing I just did, but with a reflective panel behind it. So, but that's a quick overview of using Cinema4D, you know, within After Effects. I would spend more time with the modeling aspect, but my battery's almost dead, and I don't appear to have my charger with me. So, and as you can imagine, this takes quite a bit of time, or quite a bit of battery power. But you know, the more lights you put in a Cinema file, the more reflective surfaces you have, things that require a lot of heavy calculation, the longer it takes to render. So that's why, you know, usually whenever we render out of After Effects, we're just rendering, we just go composition render queue, add to the render queue and go straight out of After Effects. But that's where Media Encoder comes in. So it's a second app that will actually handle the rendering so you can continue working in After Effects. So if we add this to the render, to the Media Encoder, it will launch that. When I did the example I just showed you earlier, with the chrome ball in the background and that kind of thing, it took about 10 minutes to render. So being able to shove that off to Media Encoder let me keep doing other stuff. And it'll just load it up into the queue window here, and whenever it shows up, you just hit the play button and it renders it out. But there we go. Figure out where it's going to put it. Yeah, we're going to put this somewhere else. Let's put it work. And just hit the teeny tiny little play button and it'll render it. Oh yeah. So I can go back over here and do whatever else I needed to do. It's going along pretty decent little clip. So there we go. Got our background and everything else in. So, you know, we render out of After Effects that way. Like I said, Cinema4D itself has its own renderer. The full version does. But there's other ways that, you know, when you get really kind of complicated scenes and setups, you can also use what are referred to as render farms, which are places online. They charge you like so many cents a minute usually for renders. So if you've got a an hour and a half long render, it might cost you a couple $100 to render, but you build that stuff like that into budgets for 3D work. When I do 3D work, my budgets are much higher than they are with regular 2D animation, just because of all the extra stuff that goes into it, the extra things that are needed. So, but I usually only ever use render farms for really complex stuff. But yeah, so that's sort of it in a nutshell. A lot of stuff you can do with it, and I was thinking about it today too. Even with things like we got this logo animation assignment coming up, and probably even with the interface icons that you're doing. I mean, you've seen kind of how things can look kind of flat. So if you set up a camera, let's dump all this stuff. If I set up a disk, I don't know. Let's look at it on the X. I could create a material for it that's bright green. Maybe has no specular or reflections at all. Maybe drop it inside of a cube. That's purely black. more segments to make it smoother. Sorry, rotation segments to make it smoother. And then, oops, I could probably drop assuming this will work the way I want it to. You know, I could give a little 2D animation kind of a thing. Keyframe there. And I forgot to set my keyframe out here. Now this goes back. But for all intents and purposes, it's a pretty simple little two-dimensional kind of a shape, you know? I didn't apply all the shadowing and specular highlights and stuff to it. Just did the bare minimum to get sort of a 2D kind of a shape. So, you know, do that with, you could do that kind of thing with logos. I mean, as long as you can make them loop, you know, it'd be a neat kind of thing to try. I think it would only be one aspect of a larger animation, but you could certainly do that. Save it. And drop it in. You can't really load, I don't think you can actually, can you import? I forget. Oh, I might be able to import see if I can import this guy. I can, okay. Wasn't the one I wanted, but. There we go. So he should render out, you know, the way we want him to render out. So that could just be one aspect of a logo animation possibly. But lots of kind of cool things you can do with it. I mean, it's kind of hard to show everything in a quick period of time, but at least kind of should give you the idea, show you how it kind of works. And, you know, if you want to try it, just make a new Maxon Cinema 4D file and it should launch the program and you can kind of play around with it a little bit. I like 3D. I think it's really pretty fun. And you can load in, you know, into Cinema, you can load in even purchase 3D models from online. Like the Iron Man arm that I had in my reel came from Turbo Squid, I think. But it was fully set up so that I was able to put a bone structure in it and animate it, you know, make his fingers move and everything. So But it's a different way to use After Effects, a little extension of the whole 3D thing. So, any questions or anything else you want to see? But I didn't even really scratch the surface of most of it, to be honest with you. There's, so many different things you can do with it. So, if you like it though, I mean, if you, think it's something you want to look at, lots of good tutorials online. Lots of